And thank you for joining us. I love your new book, Autocracy, Inc. Thank you so much for writing it and all the other books you've written. And the great thing about having you on is you know what you're talking about. There's a lot of opinion about Russia and about Trump's attitude to Russia, but you know what you're talking about. So congratulations on your research. I want to ask you about something I said last week, that the fact that Trump is willing to say American citizens should be allowed to be sent overseas for punishment does something that rhymes very much with what happened in the Holocaust. That Germany was able to take people in France, Jewish people, and deport them to the East. And even the word deport was similar. So why would Trump personally say, I'm going to take regular American citizens and deport them? It sounds like he wants to be seen as an autocrat.
So obviously, I can't read Trump's mind, and I don't know what he's thinking when he says that. But you're right that both the idea of deportation and the idea of removing people to a lawless place, a place where your country doesn't control the system or where people are somehow outside of the law, outside of bureaucratic control, but legal control as well. This is an idea with a pretty old tradition. I mean, you could look at Hitler's Germany. You could look at Stalin's Russia. I wrote a book about the history of the Gulag, and that's a history of how a huge camp system was set up kind of outside of the normal sphere of the legal system, outside of the economy. People were also removed from their homes in cities and in settled parts of Russia and taken out to the peripheries. So there's a long tradition of it, and they can have several goals. One is to intimidate people. Whether you're an immigrant in the United States or whether you're a law-abiding citizen, the fear that you will be taken into a place where the rules don't count anymore is a way of is something that can be very powerful to people, and it's a way of speaking about it, is a way of keeping people under control. And then the idea of creating the system in the deportation, the bureaucracy that will do the deportation, whether it's the customs officers or the police who will carry this out, you're creating a group of people who are also accustomed to or happy to operate lawlessly, which is something, again, that's very dangerous. And it has precedence. You could use those people in another circumstance. The fact that they're being used now for immigrants, legal or illegal immigrants, doesn't mean they couldn't someday be turned against U.S. citizens. So you're beginning to create the structures of illegality.
I looked at the New York Times study as to why Trump was popular into winning the popular vote last November. And one of the two reasons was immigration. In other words, he's playing to his strength here. As much as it disturbs the media and disturbs liberals, I should say, especially, is this abuse of civil liberties. But it seems like he wants this topic to continue.
Oh, no, he wants us all to talk about immigration and illegal immigration. I'm sure of that. But I do think that this one offers an opportunity. I mean, I'm almost reluctant to use that language, but I mean, it certainly offers a political opening for not just Democrats, but Democrats or Republicans or anyone else who wants to talk about the rule of law. I mean, we could shift this conversation. So instead of making it about immigrants and immigration, we could make about it what it really is. Something that Americans, I think, understand pretty instinctively. I mean, we have a way of saying this is a free country. That we were allowed to do what we want within the law, and the law treats us all equally. I mean, I think by focusing on those things, by focusing on citizens' rights and by equal treatment under the law, I mean, these are also things that have moved in the past. Our civil rights movement, just to take an example from a more distant past, was predicated on the idea that everyone should be treated equally under the Constitution. And that was something that moved people. And I think this could, again, especially as they begin to expand this away from illegal immigrants and they begin using these illegal methods on either people with green cards or people who are U.S. citizens.
In your book, I want to quote something from your book, which grabbed me. No nation is condemned forever to autocracy, just as no nation is guaranteed democracy. And I guess the question that has got to me was, how can a country move as Hungary did, for example, from excited about its freedom in 1989? I interviewed Gizi Yasansky over there in Budapest, and he was thrilled talking about democracy and freedom and how Boris Yeltsin was sending the message that freedom is contagious. And all of a sudden, we end up with Viktor Orban. And so, how does a country move from a semblance, in fact, in our country, a real democracy, and I'm proud of it, to something that's not quite a democracy anymore?
I mean, honestly, it doesn't take as much as you think. So in the case of Hungary, there was a very slow, long process. There was, a prime minister who was elected democratically, and who then used the institutions of democracy to put pressure on the media, to capture the court system, and eventually to capture the state, meaning that state institutions were no longer neutral. They were no longer operating for the benefit of all Hungarians. They were benefiting simply the ruling party. And actually, in the case of Hungary, the prime minister's family. Viktor Orban's family has become very wealthy, and they've also driven down the Hungarian economy. And Hungary is an interesting example of a country that was imagined when you went there, in 89 or in the early 90s, people imagined Hungary would be a huge leader, a wealthy country. By now, it's actually at the bottom of a lot of league tables in the European Union. It's become poorer because of what Viktor Orban did. But what's happening in our country is something similar, although it's happening much faster. You have a small but dedicated group of people who are seeking to politicize institutions that are meant to be for all of us. So whether it's the various government agencies, the agencies that regulate traffic safety or highway safety, or the agencies that regulate the broadcasting system, the broadcasting network. What Elon Musk's teams of people are doing is taking over those agencies, getting rid of civil servants, who are people who are sworn to work on behalf of the Constitution, and replacing them instead with loyalists.
Yeah.
And the people doing this are people who have mixed interests. So Musk himself has interests in these bureaucracies. They regulate his companies. In some cases, they subsidize his companies. So he's not doing this in the interests of Americans. He's doing this in the interest of himself and his companies. And you're taking those institutions, and instead of making them for all of us, you're making them work on behalf of a very small group of people around Donald Trump. And if you multiply that, if that begins to happen in other places, whether it's the corruption of the customs service, whether it's attacks on universities, whether it's attacks on broadcast media, all those things, when systematically carried out, I mean, actually a pretty small group of people can undermine them. And the end result is that there's no more level playing field. In other words, the next election we have, assuming we have the next elections,
Wow.
the next elections that we have will be, there won't be, the media of one side will be hampered. The lawyers who can speak out for people who've been mistreated will be also held back in various ways. I mean, the ultimate goal is to make it difficult for anybody else to win an election. I mean, this is where I'm extrapolating from Hungary and from other political systems onto ours.
I was in the Peace Corps for a couple of years, but most people are for a couple of years. And one of the great things was that when it got dark at night and you're all alone out there in Africa, and I was in Southern Africa, I had the VOA, the Voice of America, and people came on with American accents, and they told the truth. They talked about our civil rights struggle at home. It was as good as the BBC. And now he's gotten rid of it. It's like one chance for us to speak to the world with truth to the world. And we're not going to have it anymore because he doesn't want it.
Well, this is another very strange thing. I mean, this isn't quite the same thing as attacking the institutions that maintain democracy, but it's true that Trump and Musk have hampered or eliminated or destroyed, we'll see in some cases there's ongoing litigation, a whole bunch of institutions that you could roughly describe as soft power, whether it's the Voice of America or Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, or Radio Free Asia, which broadcast into China and North Korea. All these ways of speaking to the world, funding that we did for civil society, for independent media in different parts of the world, they're attempting to cut all of that. And the reason for it, I can only assume, is that they dislike the idea of spreading democracy, or they don't want America to compete as a democratic leader against the various autocratic ideologies out there. I mean, both Russia and China spend billions of dollars every year communicating their ideas to the world, to Europe, to Asia, to Africa. The Chinese have a huge network of TV and radio in multiple African languages, for example. The Russians do a huge amount of covert messaging. They create fake websites. We've seen some of that in this country, but they do it everywhere in the world. We are now not going to have a way of answering that. There's going to be no American voice speaking up for multi-party democracy, or for the rule of law, or for the idea of an independent press. They've just decided to eliminate it. And the only reason I can think of for doing that is that they don't believe in it.
Yeah. The thing is that I guess one of the things that bugs me inside is the Republican Party. I mean, my dad was a good, reasonable Republican. He believed in free trade. He believed in balanced budgets. I think he believed in civil rights. I believed in all those things. And this guy has come along, Trump, and has automatically said to people, no longer believe in free trade, no longer believe in civil rights, no longer believe in. The Republican Party was very good on civil rights back in the 60s. And don't believe in any of those things anymore. Just believe Russia's good. People are MAGA people will actually argue with me. Hey, Jim Baker said we couldn't have a NATO member to the east of Germany. And they'll come up with arguments like, how come you guys are coming up with pro-Russian arguments? Why are you basically rooting for Russia in this war of aggression against Ukraine? Why have you changed in your heads? Why have your heads swelled up with this craziness that Trump believes in simply because he says it? It's only because Trump said, I won the election of 2020, that the crazies out there believe it. It's what he says they believe. How can he make people think that what he says is the truth? Why are they buying it?
I mean, that's a complicated question.
I think it's
and I think there's a range of people.
Are their heads spinning? Are their heads controlled by Trump's voice?
Sorry. So I think there's a range of people. There's some people who don't believe it. Sorry, somebody's calling me and I don't know why or how to make it stop. Wait, sorry. I didn't expect to be using my phone. Look, the Republican Party, there's a range of people. There's some people who say, we don't really believe all of it. We don't like all of it. We just thought he was going to do deregulation and reduce our taxes. So there's a piece of it that we're still waiting for that. But also there's a piece of it that, remember, there's been a decade really of preparation, a kind of building of a conviction that, democratic institutions are rotten and don't work. That they are, they're effete, or they've been undermined. A conviction that the real enemy of this country isn't, the Russians who are doing cyber attacks on us every day, or the Chinese who want to push us out of leadership in the world, but the real enemy is the so-called Marxist left, or really ordinary people at ordinary universities or in ordinary law firms or doing ordinary government jobs, that they're somehow the enemy. And there's been a decade worth of buildup to this. I mean, this didn't happen from one day to the next. It didn't happen. The undermining of belief in a whole bunch of institutions who are dedicated to explaining reality to people. Sometimes they do it better, sometimes they do it worse, but their goal has been to explain reality, again, from the media to the scientific establishment to the universities to the government and so on. Undermining them, convincing everybody that they're worthless or useless or corrupt. I mean, that's been a very long-term project. I mean, it didn't just happen with this election, and it didn't even happen just in 2020.
Let me read something from your book along these lines. white nationalists marching in the infamous Charlottesville demonstrations that ended in violence in 2017 shouted, among other slogans, "Russia is our friend." That is pretty dramatic. Russia is our friend from a right wing crowd. Where did, again, I'm going back to who put that slogan together? Who made them believe enough to put it in their sloganeering that Russia's somehow our friends? I'm trying to think, what are they thinking about? I mean, we fought the Cold War from 47 on to 91 because of Russia. We didn't think up the Cold War. They were the aggressor country, and we were responding to it with NATO, and they were coming at us with the Warsaw Pact, taking over Hungary, taking over Czechoslovakia in 68, and stopping the tanks finally in 89 with Gorbachev. But they were the ones aggressing, if you will. Why would we like them?
So this is an interesting story, and there's some background to it. I mean, actually, the current Russian government, led by Putin, has made this huge effort to win over American conservatives, also going back for a decade. And one of the first converts was Pat Buchanan, who Putin did this show that he is somehow the leader of a white Christian country, who was fighting back against the woke pro-immigration world, with a purer, older message. And for a lot of reasons, this is rubbish. I mean, Russia is a multinational, multilingual country. It's at least 10%, maybe much more Muslim. A part of Russia is actually ruled by Sharia law, or that's Chechnya. Putin, if he's a Christian, it's pretty recent. He was a KGB officer for a long time. Most Russians don't go to church. I mean, you could go down the list of why this is all fake. But for Americans who were disappointed with their country for whatever reason, for what it had become, they didn't like integration. They didn't like the role that women were playing, who had some nostalgia for something they thought they remembered from the past. Russia became, I mean, it's actually interesting. It's almost exactly the role that the Soviet Union used to play for the left. It was like this ideal society somewhere over there where where it's all clean and white and everyone's Christian. And that's what we want America to be, like that too. And this idea, I mean, I'm simplifying a little bit, but this idea became at first pretty marginal in the conservative movement, but actually captured more and more people. And I'm afraid the fact is that Russian propaganda focused on the U.S. and the propaganda of the MAGA right, or whatever you want to call them, the far right, which is now the mainstream of the Republican Party, they were the same. They were using the same kind of language. People were getting their information from the same sources. I mean, we had an incident from last year where there was a group of there was a media company in Tennessee that produced these videos designed for public use, and that media company was actually getting paid by Russia Today, by Russian state media. And the Justice Department investigated, and this was revealed. And some of the journalists there claimed that they didn't know about it. It seems pretty unlikely to me that they didn't guess who their mysterious foreign donor was. But the Russians were just paying, right-wing Americans for producing what they produced, and occasionally asking them, "Oh, and would you throw in a conspiracy theory about Ukraine?" And they did it. So it's been a kind of joint project for going back a long way.
In your book, I was reading about how Autocracy Inc., that the autocrats of the world see one person or one entity as their enemy. And you say, it's us. It's the people reading this book, basically, who they don't like. They don't like liberal ideas, liberal education. They don't want people who see themselves as free people. They want MAGA type people.
Well, the autocrats see as their enemy anybody who believes that freedom isn't just a word. Freedom is something you need to protect, right? You need to have it protected by courts. You need law. You need respect for the law. You need the rule of law. You need for people to maintain and keep their freedom, to avoid it being captured by one political party or by one warlord, as the case may be in other countries where there's more violence, then you need some kind of system that maintains freedom. Freedom isn't just shouting that you want to be free or you get to do whatever you want. Freedom for a whole society means that you need a system of protections and rights. And I mean, and that's the idea that our founding fathers came up with when they wrote our Constitution. The idea was that there would be balance of power, and there would be, there would be these different, the legislature and the judiciary and the executive would each have different roles, and that by balancing out one another, people would maintain their freedom. I mean, freedom isn't something that you just get to say you have or declare you have, or it has to be systematic. And that's what autocracy doesn't like, because autocrats want to rule without rules. They want to rule without checks and balances. They want to be able to do whatever they want. They want their own freedom for themselves, but not for everybody else.
You live part of your life, you're married to the foreign minister of Poland, and you live in that part of the world, which me, as a Catholic, and I'm feeling about the Pope passing yesterday or this morning, and I think that the most gung-ho Catholics, if you will, are Polish people. They had been so recently under the control of the Soviet Union, and they're very, very militant in their Catholicism. But they're also very anti-communist, and they're very suspicious of the Russians. And they root, like I do, and members of my family do, root for Zelensky in Poland, in Ukraine. And it's a real belief. It's the way we thought of Churchill growing up, and our parents did. And we think he's the good guy. And yes, he was a comedian. Yes, he was a performer, but he's there heroically defending his country against this large, tyrannical Russia. I going back to something, I don't know how in your American roots, how you can root against Ukraine. How can you not root for the little guy in this David versus Goliath war against this all-powerful military of the Soviet Union, now the Russian country? By the way, it's a thought that's always been in mind. Is there any difference between Russian nationalism and the purveyor of communism? Or is this just the same instinct going after Ukraine?
So those are two separate things. I mean, first of all, there's a lot that Putin and the communists have in common. Putin, of course, is a former communist. He was a KGB officer, and he thinks the way they do. He thinks conspiratorially. He thinks as a kind of Russian nationalist and a Russian imperialist. So, Russian imperialism and Soviet imperialism weren't all that different. I mean, they have some differences in the way they behave. One of the big differences is that modern Russians are just greedier. I mean, Putin is a billionaire, and all the people around him are billionaires, and Stalin wasn't. And so that's a big difference they have. It's also an advantage they have, because it means they can buy people, they can buy influence in a way that the communists couldn't. But certainly their brutality and their lawlessness and their desire to subjugate all the peoples around Russia, yeah, I think they have that in common. How you can not root for Zelensky. I mean, it's not even just about him being David against Goliath. And by the way, a very, very successful David, when you look at what they've done. The Ukrainians have created really a whole new way of fighting a war. They've created new tactics, new kinds of drones. Their whole front line right now is defended almost entirely by these drone brigades that use technology that didn't even exist 3 years ago. I mean, it's unbelievably inventive and creative society that has really held back Russians with our help. But it's not only that. It's how can you not admire someone who is defending core American values, the belief in sovereignty, the belief in the rule of law. I come back to that again. The belief in, that people should be able to determine who their own leader is and how their system is run. I mean, Zelensky is someone who is he assumes he's acting on our behalf, on the behalf of ideals that we have long held and that we used to promote. And so that's, to me, the really strange thing about it is do Americans imagine that by supporting Imperial Russia, a country that wants to dominate and destroy other countries, that has, when they occupy Ukrainian territory, they murder people, they create concentration camps, they kidnap children. I mean, Americans aren't in favor of that. That's not good for us.
Right.
We wouldn't want to live in a society like that, and we don't support societies like that.
When you look at pictures of Vladimir Putin riding around on a horse with his shirt off, you look at this guy and you go, well, he was head of Stasi in Dresden. And I was over there looking at some of what's left over from at the Stasi Museum in Dresden. And I have to tell you, if he wanted that, and he wants Russia to come back as the Soviet Union, a larger frontier of a country, including Ukraine, why would Trump or any human being believe in his desire for a peace treaty? Why would a man with that madness in his heart, wanting to reclaim the empire of the Soviet Union, why would you trust him for a nickel, for 10 cents? Why would you say this guy wants a peace deal over? He didn't even stop shooting. His army didn't even stop shooting against Ukraine for Easter. He's not going to stop. He wants it back. Why does Trump forget his ideology? Why does Trump believe in Putin wanting peace?
I mean, first of all, you have to ask him. I mean, I don't read Trump's brain. The only thing I can say is that Trump has been an admirer of Russians, someone who's done business with Russians. His real estate companies were set up for many years to accept money, often anonymously, from Russians. Russians have bought property from him at inflated prices. I mean, he's been part of the world of post-Soviet Russian business, for 30 years. He has some clear belief that he enjoys some kind of special relationship with Putin. It looks to me like it's his imagination. Given how much fun of him the Russian media makes him. If you watch the Russian propagandists on television, they're always laughing at Trump and making fun of Trump. But he has in his head this idea that he has some special relationship and that he can trust him. Where it comes from, I mean, you'd have to go back into his biography. That was done actually during his first presidency. It was investigated endlessly. People produced plenty of stories about peculiar deals that Trump had done in the past, his desire to build a tower in Moscow, all that. None of it's changed. I mean, all of that was true. It's just that Americans decided they didn't care about it.
It just seemed that the media, and I'll be a little bit defensive here because it's appropriate, never could nail the story that he was an agent of Russia. There was always this story about
He's not an agent.
performance in a bedroom in a hotel, and all that story made the rounds that apparently wasn't true. And all this stuff constantly trying to nail him as an agent of Russia, and it could never be established. There were presence of Russians.
No.
Why were there so many Russians around? Always around. Him wanting to go and have a hotel in Moscow. There's like an Erstpolitik with Trump, the Eastern leaning. Why did he want to be a big deal in Moscow? I could never figure out why that was his urge.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say that, what with Trump, the damning stuff was the stuff that was public. There was no secret to be found. He wasn't a secret agent. Whether the Russians know something about him or not, I don't think any of that's important. All you had to do was look at his business record, look at what he had been doing and saying for 30 years in public. It wasn't there was no secret. The mistake people made in writing about Trump and Russia was trying to find some secret payoff. The payoffs were public. They were his business deals. And I think that was a big misunderstanding. Plenty was written. A lot of it was true, and yet people wanted some secret, mysterious explanation. I mean, I think the explanations are on the surface. Trump liked and sympathized with the Russians. He did business with them. He admires Putin because he admires strong men who don't have to obey rules. He wants to run America the way Putin runs Russia. It's somebody he respects. I mean, and he says it. So maybe that's the explanation.
Let's talk about, their book's called Autocracy Inc. rather. Good luck with the book. I hope we sell some books here today. I want to ask you about the world. If you look at Xi in China, if you look at Putin, you look at North Korea, I guess you can look at Iran. These leaders seem to be headed towards worse. They're not getting any better. And in the world Joe Biden, to his credit, helped create. As Tom Friedman once said in the New York Times, he's succeeded in uniting Europe, if not the United States. But Europe looks very united. Carney up in Canada, apparently in Australia, these governments are very strong. Sturm looks good. I mean, these countries that you thought the liberals would lose the next election look like they're on a road to possibly winning because of Trump. But Biden, too. There's a healthy democratic world out there. It's very healthy. Unfortunately, it's not centered here, not in the United States, which is awful as an American. It's awful that we're not the center of democracy, but we're not. Canada looks very strong in democracy, and Britain and Germany even. Germany has recovered wonderfully from World War II, thanks to Adenauer. I read a book by, who was the guy? The former foreign minister of the United States. And I have to tell you, the countries look very strong in democracy, but we're not the leader anymore. So which way's the wind blowing right now? Ann Applebaum.
I mean, we are in a moment of autocratic power. The autocrats are working together. Their propaganda and narratives are very strong. A lot of modern technology works in their favor, whether it's surveillance technology or even just the sort of behavioral technology that is used on the internet. I mean, they have, social media turns out to be very good for spreading angry and aggressive messages, which also works in their favor. All those things work in their favor. I mean, over the long term, one of the things that I've found in really very different countries and different places, people don't, ordinary people can understand the appeal of democracy very well. So even in the worst dictatorships, in Russia and China, in Iran, people understand that it's unfair that they don't have rights, and they understand that corrupt courts are bad for them. They understand that when the state and the ruling party has a monopoly on power, that gives them a monopoly on the economy as well, and that's unfair too, and that ordinary people don't do well in those kinds of systems. And so there is you will always have an underground democracy movement or a quiet democracy movement or a dissident movement that's growing. I mean, you will never hear people stop talking about and wanting democracy, because it's the only political system that gives ordinary people any chance of power and any chance of freedom and any chance of success. And so while it does feel right now like autocracy is winning, I don't think their ideas are winning. And I don't think they ever will win.
Well, that's a good message to leave our audience with today. And I do hope that Trump is a passing fashion that will go away, and we will find ourselves in a different, more familiar America. Your book's called Autocracy, Inc. I want to say one thing. Somebody wrote me a letter very recently, and I want to tell them that they're succeeding. Mr. Matthews, every time I see you on Morning Joe, I am reminded of how much I miss Hardball. I truly believe that your expertise is needed now more than ever before. Do you ever think about hosting a new show? Well, I am hosting a new show on Substack. It's called Hardball, a familiar name. I'm going to continue to run this show for a long time, and I thank you, Jason Colella. But Ann Applebaum, I think you have a great voice that people listen to, and you're benefiting from that voice. People want to hear you. And I really wish you do more of this kind of interview. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks.